Democrats claiming that Secretary of War Pete Hegseth committed a war crime. What's their strategy? What are they doing? And is Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona going to be the Democratic nominee for president? He sure seems to be trying it. Plus, a gigantic special election in Tennessee's Congressional District 7. Why is that one even close? We'll get to all of it first. Cyber Week means our best deal of the year. Daily Wire Plus is 50% off right now. Go to dailywire.com/subscribe. Well, folks, Democrats have hit upon a two-pronged strategy for 2028. One of them is to make members of the military very uncomfortable about following their orders. Apparently, they believe that this will somehow create unrest, chaos. I don't know how else to explain why Democrats are now suddenly coming out of the woodwork to suggest that a bunch of illegal orders are being issued from the Trump administration that members of the military must now consider. Remember, when Democrats, people like Senator Mark Kelly or Senator Alyssa Slotkin from Michigan, when they come out and they say to soldiers, to airmen, to members of the Navy, when they say to these people, if you guys follow an illegal order, you will be punished, but then they don't define illegal order, what they are doing is creating a catch-22. Because if people follow their orders, well, then they're protected in the moment. But down the road, some Democrat may be elected and declare that actually retroactively those orders were illegal and members of the military should not have obeyed them. And if right now they decide, you know what, I think that order is illegal, I'm not following it, they could end up court-martialed. So it's a catch-22 for members of the military. That is why it is so negative what Democrats are doing without specifying the actual orders they believe are illegal and that ought to be disobeyed. So that is prong one in the Democratic strategy, is a sort of chaos strategy with regard to military orders. Prong number two is setting up an entire slate of possible Democratic nominees who appear to be moderate. And this is really interesting. So one of the big questions in the aftermath of President Trump winning his second term was, will Democrats shift over to the Zoran Mamdani left, or are they going to move toward a more moderate middle? Are they going to jettison much of their culture war baggage? Are they going to start talking about trans, or are they going to stop talking about trans? Are they going to up the ante on DEI, or are they going to move away from DEI? And by all indicators, it appears the Democrats are not being morons. It appears that while people like Zoran Mamdani may be winning in places like New York, deep blue areas, it appears that what they are actually attempting to do is play moderate, which of course is smart. It seems that more and more often they're playing dead on the trans issue. This is what happened with California Governor Gavin Newsom, who seems to want it every single way on the trans issue. Sure, it's unfair for boys to compete against girls, but also maybe transing is fine. When it comes to issues like DEI, it's kind of disappeared from the Democratic lexicon. You don't hear Democrats talking about equity in the same way that they were even a year and a half ago, when this was the be-all, end-all of American politics. Apparently, they no longer want to talk about that. Even on immigration, Democrats have taken a more moderate middle line. They're no longer arguing along with AOC that ICE ought to be disbanded. They're not arguing anymore that the police ought to be defunded. Instead, what they seem to be doing is arguing that President Trump is largely right on the southern border. They just don't like that he's being overzealous in the prosecution of illegal immigrants who they say have not committed crimes. So Democrats seem to actually be, at least in image, turning toward the middle. And I think that's part of what is going on with regard to this big controversy now swirling around the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. So to recap, last week there was a report from the Washington Post. It argued that the White House had, via Pete Hegseth, given a direct order to basically blow away members of narco-trafficking cartels in the water after they were already put out of commission. So basically, there was a strike on a narco-trafficking boat from Venezuela, and supposedly Pete Hegseth ordered everyone to be killed, up to and including survivors who were in the water clinging to bits of wreckage, to the wreckage of the burning boat. And this raised some fairly significant legal issues because, as it turns out, under the laws of war, under the Geneva Conventions, for example, and under American law, you are really not supposed to kill people who are no longer in the fight. As Andrew McCarthy at National Review pointed out, the 1949 Geneva Conventions were ratified by the United States. Common Article 3 of the convention binds our government and prohibits, quote, violence to life and person, in particular murder of all kinds, of persons taking no active part in hostilities. And that includes people placed what's called hors de combat by sickness, wounds, detention, or any other cause. In other words, you can't take somebody as a POW and just shoot them. Or if you wound somebody on the battlefield, under the Geneva Conventions, there is no policy of we take no prisoners, everyone gets killed on the battlefield. Jack Goldsmith, who headed the DOJ's Office of Legal Counsel in the Bush 43 administration, notes that the Department of Defense Law of War Manual defines hors de combat to include persons, quote, otherwise incapacitated by shipwreck, And apparently Congress has incorporated grave breaches of CA3 in the Penal Code's War Crimes Statute, that's Section 2441, when committed in the context of and in association with an armed conflict not of an international character, which is how the administration currently describes its operations blowing up these narco-trafficking boats in the Caribbean. And those grave breaches include murder defined, quote, the act of a person who intentionally kills or conspires or attempts to kill or kills, whether intentionally or unintentionally, in the course of committing any other offense under this subsection, one or more persons taking no active part in the hostilities, including those placed out of combat by sickness, wounds, detention, or any other cause. So, obviously, if the Post report were accurate, this would at least be a serious legal question. Now, we discussed yesterday on the program the possibility that actually these people would not be considered hors de combat depending on the condition of the boat. That maybe the boat is still floating, it's kind of dead in the water, but at the same time, they can call their narco-trafficking friends, they can be picked up, they can be back in the narco-trafficking fight momentarily. Now, that is one possible defense. But it's also unclear what exactly happened here. Now, the White House is defending Pete Hegseth. The White House said on Monday that the U.S. military conducted 2 alleged strikes on an alleged drug boat in the Caribbean, deepening questions about Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's role in an operation that led to the killing of 2 survivors. Admiral Frank Mitch Bradley, the head of Special Operations Command, was acting legally under authority to use lethal force granted by Hegseth in conducting the attacks on the boat. Already coming up, was there actually a second strike that was authorized by Hegseth at people in the water? We'll get to all of that first. I've been with our ad partner Pure Talk for many years now. Honestly, I've never seen them do anything quite like they're doing right now. Here's the deal. They're offering unlimited talk, unlimited text, unlimited data, plus a 30-gig hotspot for just $29.95 a month. And that price is locked in for life. This is normally their premium plan. It goes for $65 a month. But if you switch before December 7th, you get it for $29.95 every single month from here on out. That's more than half off permanently. And yeah, it's all on their 5G network. So you're not sacrificing speed or coverage. Look, I know these kinds of offers don't stick around long. If you've been thinking about switching carriers, now is probably the time. Head on over to puretalk.com/Shapiro to grab this deal. Honestly, it's worth telling your friends or family about as well. If you have kids and you're thinking about getting any of them a first phone this Christmas, or just looking to cut some unnecessary costs, this Pure Talk deal is truly worth checking out. I use Pure Talk all the time. I'm on the road making calls. My calls are important to me. Your calls are important to you. Make the switch in as little as 10 minutes. Keep your phone, keep your number, start saving with unlimited for life for just $29.95 a month. Again, that's puretalk.com/Shapiro to switch on over to my wireless company, Pure Talk. Tax and fees not included. Some restrictions apply. See puretalk.com for details. Offer ends 12/7/25. Also, sleep. That's your secret weapon during cold and flu season. It's literally when your immune system does its best work. But here's the thing. You can't get that deep restorative sleep if you're tossing and turning on the wrong mattress. When you're fighting off germs or trying not to catch them in the first place, having a mattress that actually supports your body and keeps you comfortable all night, it's not just nice to have, it's essential. Nobody wants to be tired and run down during holiday season. Helix knows how to make sure you're waking up your best self. Finding the right mattress doesn't have to be guesswork. Helix makes it simple with their sleep quiz. It asks about your preferences, your sleep style, then it matches you with the mattress that's actually right for you. They're not just making promises. Helix is the most awarded mattress brand out there with glowing reviews from Forbes, Wired, and other trusted experts. The best part, they deliver straight to your door with free shipping, so no hauling anything yourself. Plus, with their happy with Helix guarantee, you get 120 nights to try it out and a limited lifetime warranty. So if it's not working for you, returns and exchanges are totally seamless. It's basically a risk-free way to finally get the sleep you deserve, especially when you need it most. Now, I have a firm but breathable mattress. It's what I need to sleep properly. When I'm on the road, I just don't sleep the same because I need my Helix sleep mattress. So do you. Go to helixsleep.com/Ben. Get 27% off site-wide. That's helixsleep.com/Ben for 27% off site-wide. Make sure you enter our show name into the post-purchase survey so they know we sent you. helixsleep.com/Ben. President Trump, for his part, actually did say on Sunday that he did not want a second strike. In other words, he was fine with the original strike on the boat, but if there was somebody who's floating around in the water on the wreckage, no, you're not supposed to fire a Hellfire missile at that person and blow them apart. Here's President Trump on Sunday.
Following up on that, what day? On the Venezuela boat strike, if there were a second strike that killed wounded people, wounded in the first strike, are you thinking that would be legal?
Number one, I don't know that happened. And Pete said he did not want them. He didn't even know what people were talking about. So we'll look into it. But no, I wouldn't have wanted that. Not a second strike. The first strike was very lethal. It was fine. And if there were 2 people around, but Pete said that didn't happen.
Does that make you
I have great confidence.
He's saying there's no second strike?
I don't know. I'm going to find out about it. But Pete said he did not order the death of those 2 men.
Okay, so President Trump says that Pete Hegseth did not order the death of the people in the water. And this is the real question here is whether the second strike was authorized by Pete Hegseth, knowing that people were actually in the water and drowning, or that they were clinging to life and basically they were killed while wounded. Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, came out yesterday and read a statement at the White House.
President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have made it clear that presidentially designated narco-terrorist groups are subject to lethal targeting in accordance with the laws of war. With respect to the strikes in question on September 2nd, Secretary Hegseth authorized Admiral Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat to the United States of America was eliminated.
Okay, so again, the contention here is actually that there was a general order given to take out the boat, and that maybe Admiral Bradley is the person who actually gave the order to conduct a second strike, if in fact a second strike was conducted. Caroline Leavitt did say that Pete Hegseth did not order that everyone be killed, because, again, that would possibly violate war crime statutes.
Thank you, Caroline. Sure. So just to be clear, to clarify on Jackie and Gabe, did Admiral Bradley order that second strike because there were still survivors after the initial strike?
Again, as I read for you, Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law. He directed the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat of narco-terrorists to the United States was completely eliminated.
So was the initial order from Secretary Hegseth, everyone be killed, and did that come from President Trump?
I saw that quoted in a Washington Post story. I would reject that the Secretary of War ever said that. However, the president has made it quite clear that if narco-terrorists, again, are trafficking illegal drugs towards the United States, he has the authority to kill them. And that's what this administration is doing.
Okay, so there actually doesn't seem to be a legal dispute nearly as much as a factual dispute about what actually happened. Secretary Hegseth, for his part, put out a statement, quote, "Let's make one thing crystal clear. Admiral Mitch Bradley is an American hero, a true professional, and has my 100% support. I stand by him and the combat decisions he has made on the September 2nd mission and all other since. America is fortunate to have such men protecting us. When this Department of War says we have the back of our warriors, we mean it." Now, the New York Times did have a follow-up piece that came out late yesterday in which they seem to admit that Hegseth did not give a general kill order, especially for people who are already hors de combat. According to the New York Times, the Trump administration on Monday defended the legality of that September 2nd attack on a boat in the Caribbean Sea, as calls grew in Congress to examine whether a follow-up missile strike that killed survivors amounted to a crime. According to 5 U.S. officials who spoke separately and on the condition of anonymity to discuss a sensitive matter under investigation, Mr. Hegseth, ahead of the September 2nd attack, ordered a strike that would kill the people on the boat and destroy the vessel and its purported cargo of drugs. But each official said Mr. Hegseth's directive did not specifically address what should happen if a first missile turned out not to fully accomplish all of those things. And the official said his order was not a response to surveillance footage showing that at least 2 people on the boat survived the first blast. So according to every single source, it doesn't sound like Hegseth did anything wrong. It sounds like Hegseth said, kill the people on the boat. So they tried to. They fired some sort of Hellfire missile at the people on the boat. They blew up the boat. And then there were survivors. And if there was a second strike, he did not come back in and say, kill those people. It was not in response to surveillance footage showing survivors. And he didn't actually say in the original order, oh yeah, by the way, if they're wounded and hors de combat, you should kill them anyway. Apparently, Bradley ordered the initial missile strike and then several follow-up strikes that killed the initial survivors and sank the disabled boat. As the operation unfolded, according to these sources, Hegseth did not give any further orders to him. They were clarifying, these officials, the sequence of events. Again, that is different from the original report in the Washington Post, which said that Bradley ordered the second strike to fulfill a directive by Hegseth to kill everyone. So that does sound as though it's bad reporting from the Washington Post. And if there's a question, the question now falls on Admiral Bradley as to why he ordered follow-up strikes if people were in fact hors de combat, or maybe they weren't hors de combat in the first place. Okay, all of this seems like a convenient way of simply providing support to the Democrats doing what was quite a bad thing a couple of weeks ago when they released that video telling members of the military not to obey orders. It feels ginned up. It feels as though the Washington Post went ahead and reported a story on extraordinarily thin sourcing to create the possibility of an illegal order that it turns out may not have been illegal at all, in order to provide support for the Democratic narrative that this administration is lawless and that only a moderate military veteran, who might be running in 2028, can step into the breach. And again, it'll be interesting to see what happens here. But this does feel like the predicate for a move by the Democratic Party to elevate somebody like a Senator Mark Kelly, for example. So if you check the Kalshi market right now, Kalshi is one of our sponsors, what you will see is that Gavin Newsom is far and away the leader right now in terms of who is most likely to be the Democratic presidential nominee. He's about 37% on the Kalshi markets. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez is at 10%, and then you've got Josh Shapiro at 6%, Pete Buttigieg at 6%, Kamala Harris at 5%. Mark Kelly is all the way down at 2%. But, again, it is extremely early right now, like really, really early. And so it is quite possible that you could see somebody like a Mark Kelly make some sort of fairly strong move. Mark Kelly did win a narrow election originally in the Senate in 2020 over Martha McSally. He won 51-48. And then he won again over Blake Masters, 51-46, a couple of years later when the special election was over. It's still a 2-year term, and then he has a full term that goes until 2028. Kelly, of course, is a military veteran. He is an astronaut. He tends to portray himself as a moderate, even though he voted with Joe Biden in the Senate, something like 95% of the time. He tries to portray himself as a middle-of-the-road moderate. Kyrsten Sinema, who was, of course, the other Democratic senator who then turned independent and now is no longer in the Senate, Ruben Gallego has filled that seat. She was an actual moderate. Like, she stood up against Democratic predations with regard to the filibuster. Kelly is a down-the-line Democrat, but he wants to present as a moderate. And this is why I say it seems to me the Democrats are trying to elevate some of their more moderate voices, at least the ones who are not talking openly about DEI, trans, and the rest of their sort of radical issue set. Alrighty, coming up, Senator Mark Kelly. Does that guy have presidential aspirations? It kind of feels like at first. When we started Daily Wire, it felt like we had to figure everything out with minimal help. Editorial guidelines, studio setup, production schedule, branding. It was overwhelming. New decisions were needed daily. Finding that one tool that simplifies everything when starting a business becomes a game changer and a lifesaver. For millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the e-commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the United States. We even use it for our own Daily Wire shop to make sure things are running smoothly and efficiently so you can get the goods. You might be asking, what if I can't design a website? Or I'm worried people haven't heard of my brand. Well, not a problem. Shopify's got you covered from the start with beautiful, ready-to-go templates that match your brand style and help you find your customers through easy-to-run email and social media campaigns. And if you need a hand with everyday tasks, their AI tools created specifically for commerce can help enhance product images, write descriptions, and more. Plus, their award-winning customer support is available 24/7 to share advice if you ever get stuck. Turn those dreams into and give them the best shot at success with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/Shapiro. Head on over to shopify.com/Shapiro. That's shopify.com/Shapiro. Also, you know what I realized? Well, when your metabolism is actually working the way it's supposed to, you feel it everywhere. More energy, better sleep, the whole deal. And that's why I started using Lumen. It's the world's first handheld metabolic coach. Honestly, it's pretty simple. You just breathe into it first thing in the morning. It tells you whether your body is burning fat or carbs for fuel. And then it gives you a personalized nutrition plan for the day based on what's actually happening in your body, not some generic diet plan, but recommendations tailored to your real-time metabolic state. Between holidays and unholy amounts of sweets and dinners, those personalized plans can come in really handy. I also love that I can use it before and after workouts, see how my body is responding in real time. It's helped me figure out what actually works for my training and recovery, not just what is supposed to work in theory. New Year's resolutions will absolutely be elevated in 2026 with all this extra information in my pocket. It's like having a coach that helps you understand your body's engine and how to fuel it properly, not just for weight management, but for better energy, fitness results, and sleep as well. Instead of guessing or following trends, you're making decisions based on actual data from your own body. And over time, you start to see patterns and really understand what moves the needle for you personally. I use that Lumen to make sure that I'm working out the best I can, getting the best nutrition. And winter is the perfect season to build that strength from within. Stay energized, stay resilient, take charge of your metabolism. Go to lumen.me/Shapiro to get an additional 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/Shapiro for 15% off on top of any offers or sales running on their website. So Kelly is obviously taking advantage of this situation to promote his own profile. Here he was yesterday sounding the alarm on Pete Hegseth.
I was talking about this from the beginning of this operation, that the thing that I am most concerned about is the very difficult situations that this Secretary of Defense is going to put service members into. And it's because this guy is so unqualified for the job. I mean, think about this. He runs around on a stage talking about lethality and warrior ethos and killing people. We have the most competent, capable military this planet has ever seen by far. That's not the message that needs to come from the Secretary of Defense.
Okay, so again, Kelly is, by the way, promoting himself. In the middle of this little address about Pete Hegseth, he talked about his own record and all of the fighting that he'd done and the fact that he was a braver man than President Trump and all of the rest of it. And Kelly then went on CNN to double down on this.
I mean, the Washington Post says they were clinging to the wreckage, but whatever. They're survivors. We know there were survivors. Are you allowed to then attack the survivors?
Absolutely not. I sunk a OSA-2 missile patrol boat. It was in the middle of the night, like 3 a.m., with 2 cluster munitions in Kuwait Harbor. And then we left. We were, out a Pulnaki troop carrier in the Persian Gulf during the day getting shot at by, there were 2 ships. One of them was shooting at us. No, you don't do that. Everybody knows that. That is against the Geneva Conventions. That's against the laws of war, which we should always be abiding by. We're the United States of America. We are not Russia. We're not Iraq. We're not Iran. We have to hold our people to a higher standard. This is really serious.
So the White House...
Okay, again, I think this is all part of an attempt by Democrats to sort of push themselves toward a moderate middle by suggesting that war crimes have been committed here. Hakeem Jeffries over in the House Minority Leader, who, if Trent told, could soon be the Speaker of the House. He was raging about this yesterday.
Everybody on Capitol Hill knows he should have never been confirmed. It's a shame. It's because these Senate Republicans, just like House Republicans, are nothing more than puppets for Donald Trump's extreme policies. That's why they put Pete Hegseth into that position when they knew he was woefully unqualified. And now we have real evidence that extrajudicial killings are taking place. That's the stain on America's leadership in the free world, which is why our international standing is plummeting. And of course, the standing of the Republican Party is a complete and total disaster here in the United States of America.
Again, I will give credit to the Democrats for being clever right here, and it appears that this may be bearing some fruit. So today, there's a special election in Tennessee's 7th Congressional District. That district should be a cakewalk for Republicans. It should be. That is a district that Mark Green, who was the incumbent in the last 2024 congressional election cycle, he won that seat by 70,000 votes. He won by a 20-point margin, the Tennessee 7th. This is a heavy red district. And yet, right now, if you look at the polling, this district is incredibly, incredibly close. According to the Daily Wire, the reputation of our state is on the line, said Tennessee Republican Senator Bill Hagerty, as he addressed several hundred Republican voters gathered Monday morning to rally support for congressional candidate Matt Van Epps 1 day before the special election that is taking place today. The temperatures outside were chilly. The mood of Republican officials inside the rally was confident but urgent. Most said they believe Van Epps will win the race for Tennessee's 7th Congressional District. The margins could be closer than what would typically be expected in the Republican favorable district. He is facing off, Van Epps, against a state Democratic representative named Afton Bain, who's a far-left candidate who supports trans procedures on kids and wants to roll back Tennessee's pro-life protections. Democrats have been pouring millions and millions of dollars into the race. Hagerty said it's going to come down to numbers. The Democrats have seen an opportunity. They're counting on us to slide into December 2nd, having enjoyed Thanksgiving and not thinking the seat is at risk. The fact that this seat is even close speaks to a real problem for Republicans. Republican officials say they believe Van Epps will win by 7 to 10%. But again, remember, in the last election cycle, this was a 20-point margin, like a 20-point margin. And the Democrat in this race, again, she is trying to elide some of the more controversial issues, but she herself is pretty radical. So here, for example, is the Tennessee Democrat Afton Bain being asked about whether there ought to be more policing or defunding of the police.
Crime is, of course, also was a major issue in the presidential election. And I know there are some old posts. You've been asked about those old posts a number of times. My question for you today is whether more money for cops on the streets in the district you hope to represent would help fight crime. Would you like more money for more cops on the streets in your district?
So those past comments were at a time when I was a private citizen, as an activist and organizer, and now as a Tennessee lawmaker, I represent 40,000 individual opinions and political thought.
Right,
and
so what do you think now? Would more money for cops be good or bad?
I think it depends on what the community wants. And so I've worked with communities, at least my constituents, want to ensure that there is investment in their community for community safety, community protection, mental health services. And that's what I'm hearing from at least my constituents.
All right, fair enough.
Okay, so it's not fair enough because, again, she's not actually giving an answer there. She's a radical who is posing as a quasi-moderate, like a little bit. She's been called the AOC of Tennessee for a reason. Here is CNN's Casey Hunt asking her about it.
Where would you place yourself when you think about all of the other Democrats on the national stage, and you are taking a turn on the national stage because of the way this race has been going? The president's labeled you the AOC of Tennessee. Are you the AOC of Tennessee?
I resonate with Democrats who have been trying to lower costs for working families and those that don't take corporate PAC. Tennessee is a state that has been bought and sold to the highest bidder. And the reason this race is so close is because voters in the 7th District want someone who is not going to sell out to special interest, but will represent the people. And that's why I hope we will be able to pull out this win tomorrow.
Now, again, that is a great way of avoiding the answer, which is that she very much is of the AOC wing of the Democratic Party. She is expected to lose. The margin of her loss is going to matter an awful lot looking forward to the midterms. According to our sponsors over at Comet, a project of perplexity, I asked, how many seats should Republicans be expected to lose in 2026 if they lose the Tennessee 7th congressional district in a special election? And according to Comet, if Republicans lose that district, it would be a major upset. The district is historically very conservative. It previously gave Trump and Republicans 60% of the vote. If there were a loss in Tennessee 7 to a Democrat, that would suggest that Republicans could lose above average numbers, possibly anywhere from 20 to 40 seats, depending on national mood and turnout. Coming up, we'll be joined by the Republican congressional candidate in that Tennessee 7th district. First, this episode is sponsored by Balance of Nature. Look, I'm on the road constantly, covering news stories, political events, you name it. Between the flights and the hotel rooms, sometimes getting a proper nutritional meal is the first thing that goes out the window. But here's the thing. I've got a wife and kids at home counting on me to stay healthy, which is why I started taking Balance of Nature's fruits and veggies supplements. These are the original whole food supplements, 16 fruits, 15 veggies, freeze-dried into capsules. As somebody who keeps kosher, I appreciate there are no binders, no fillers, no flow agents, just 100% whole food ingredients, nothing added that shouldn't be there. When I'm rushing through an airport, I can take them with water. If I'm in the car between interviews, I can chew them. Sometimes I'll even open the capsules and mix that powder into my smoothies. However my day is going, they go with me. Balance of Nature delivers the natural goodness of fruits, vegetables, spices, fibers, just as nature intended, which means even when I'm 2,000 miles from home, I'm still taking care of myself the way my family needs me to. Now, I love Balance of Nature. It means that I'm healthy. I'm taking it on the road with me. I'm popping it into protein smoothies. Plus, they are launching a fantastic new product. Balance of Nature's freeze-dried snacks are 100% real fruit, bananas, mangoes, pineapples, strawberries, freeze-dried to lock in flavor and give that perfect crunch. Go to balanceofnature.com, get a free variety snack pack, plus a free preferred customer membership with your first set of Balance of Nature supplements. Head on over to balanceofnature.com to claim this limited time offer before it ends. Also, our Cyber Week continues with our best deal that we offer all year long, 50% off all Daily Wire Plus annual memberships. That gets you everything, every show, every film, every investigation, and the first chance to watch the epic 7-part cinematic series, The Pendragon Cycle: Rise of the Merlin. All access members watch episodes 1 and 2 on Christmas Day. Everybody else, January 22nd. You're not going to see this price again for a full year. Join now at dailywire.com/subscribe or kiss that deal goodbye. Well, joining us on the line is the man standing in the breach, Matt Van Epps. Matt, of course, is a West Point grad. He has a long and outstanding career, and now he's running in what is a shockingly tight race in the Tennessee 7th. Matt, thanks so much for taking the time.
Ben, thank you so much. Honored to be on with you.
So why don't we talk about the state of the race? Tell us about your opponent and tell us about yourself.
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, the distinction here between the two of us cannot be more clear. I'm a Christian, a husband, a father, an America First conservative, and a combat veteran. I'm a West Point graduate. I served in Iraq and Afghanistan as a helicopter pilot, to include service with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, with real world boots on the ground leadership experience. And you contrast that with my opponent, who is a socialist, has been endorsed by the Democratic Socialists of America, who wants new and higher taxes to fund her socialist agenda that will skyrocket our cost of living. We are going to work to decrease cost of living, to drive America First forward. My opponent wants to defund the police. She wants to abolish prisons. She is a crazy far left radical, and we've got to stand against that. And that's what we're going to do when we win decisively today. And we're up right now, and we're driving a whole lot of folks out to the polls today.
Yeah, so Matt, obviously Democrats have been pouring money into this race. They've had a bunch of big names who've shown up in the district, including Kamala Harris, who made her first post-election surrogate speech for your opponent, as well as AOC, who showed up at a virtual rally alongside Al Gore. You know, there's been an attempt by Democrats to at least drive the margin down. So even if she loses, she doesn't lose by that much because, of course, this is a historically very conservative district. How much does margin of victory matter tonight as opposed to just victory?
Well, we want to win. We want to win by as much as possible. But here, I think it's a win. This is with special election dynamics. You know, it's a time of year where folks are not used to going to the polls right after Thanksgiving. We've done a whole lot of work to show just who our opponent is. They're not attack ads. It's just showing her public statements and what she believes in, which is the polar opposite of us. We stand with law enforcement. We back the blue. We're going to drive down taxes, cut red tape. And as we've also worked to get out the vote, and we're seeing that right now. We've got reports coming back in from polling locations across the district that are very favorable to us. We won early voting, and we want to keep pushing forward to get the biggest margin possible. And Ben, I'll tell you, we built a coalition in this since the primary. Honored to be endorsed by the president. Speaker Johnson was with me campaigning all day yesterday. We went to probably 10 events yesterday. And I've got over 50 local endorsements from leaders across the 14 counties, business leaders, farmers, you name it. And we've got the coalition, and I'm so proud of that. And that's what's going to take us to victory today.
So, Matt, I think that the big question, obviously, on everybody's mind is, aside from the special election dynamics, the fact that it's held in an off year at a time of the year when people aren't used to voting, as you say, you know, this isn't a district that should be heavily Republican. So what do you think are sort of the national dynamics that Republicans should worry about come 2026, the issues they should be focusing on come 2026, given the fact that this district is obviously looking more competitive than otherwise anyone would suspect?
Well, we're talking a lot about affordability, about housing, healthcare, childcare, energy, keeping taxes low, cutting red tape, keeping our borders secure, keeping men out of women's sports, getting really good jobs. And so we've focused a lot on that. We've heard about that. We've got a significant rural population too, a lot of farmers. And so I stand with our farmers. I did not grow up on a farm, but met with Farm Bureau a number of times, met with farmers across the district, been endorsed by farmers, and we're going to fight hard for them. Fort Campbell is in district where I serve with the 160th in Montgomery County and Clarksville. So military and veterans, very important. And we'll be fighting hard for them from day one.
Well, that is Matt Van Epps. He is running in the Tennessee 7th Congressional District. It is the biggest race of the year so far. And we hope that he not only wins the race, but that he blows out his socialistic opponent. Matt Van Epps, thanks so much for taking the time. Good luck in the race today.
And thank you, sir. Really appreciate it.
Well, meanwhile, the president of the United States, while we are fighting an actual war on narco-terrorists in the Caribbean, and while we're putting pressure on Venezuela militarily not to ship fentanyl up to the United States, up to and including, by the way, pressure for possible regime change in Venezuela, the president made a very odd move over the course of the last few days. He is apparently now considering the pardon of the ex-president of Honduras who flooded America with drugs. And I honestly cannot explain this. I've long been an advocate of getting rid of the pardon power. I think the pardon power is generally a disaster area. I think it's bad for governors. I think it's bad for presidents. It seems to me that having one person with the ability to simply pardon people is a bizarre holdover from monarchy. If you actually want the criminal justice system to mean anything, it means that the consequences have to attend to the crimes. And we've had too many situations dating all the way back to Bill Clinton of corruption being implicit in the pardon power. You think of Denise Rich and Mark Rich and the sort of money that was changing hands during the Hillary Clinton New York senatorial race back in 2000 while Bill Clinton was pardoning Mark Rich. I mean, this has been a long time problem in the United States. I do not like that power. The conservative solution, by the way, typically to abuse of power is to take away power from the government. The left-wing solution typically is to maintain the power and then use it themselves. Not always true, but largely true. In this case, I just don't understand the president's logic here. According to the New York Times, he once boasted he would, quote, stuff the drugs up the gringos' noses. He accepted a $1 million bribe from El Chapo to allow cocaine shipments to pass through Honduras. A man was killed in prison to protect him. At the federal trial of Juan Orlando Hernandez in New York, testimony and evidence showed how the former president maintained Honduras as a bastion of the global drug trade. He orchestrated a vast trafficking conspiracy that prosecutors said raked in millions for cartels while keeping Honduras one of Central America's poorest, most violent, and most corrupt countries. Last year, Hernandez was convicted on drug trafficking and weapons charges and sentenced to 45 years in prison. It was one of the most sweeping drug trafficking cases to come before a U.S. court since the trial of Panamanian strongman Manuel Noriega 3 decades before. But on Friday, President Trump announced he would pardon Hernandez, who he said was a victim of political persecution. It is not clear why he believes that is the case. Apparently, Hernandez's 2-week trial in Manhattan offered a glimpse into a world of corruption and drug running spanning several countries. Bags of cash, a machine gun with his name emblazoned on it, bribes from El Chapo featured heavily. Prosecutors said that Hernandez was key to a scheme that lasted more than 20 years and brought more than 500 tons of cocaine into the United States. Honduras, of course, has long had ties with the United States, and drug trafficking has been a major problem. So if we are fighting a war on narco-terrorism, it seems to me that pardoning people who were engaged in what was apparently narco-terrorism, I do not understand that in the slightest. Certain traffickers testified that they had bribed Hernandez. He was convicted of drug trafficking and weapons conspiracy. Apparently, a letter behind the pardon has now been released. Axios says that this letter was apparently penned from Hernandez, and it was part of a long-time lobbying campaign by Roger Stone, one of the scummiest people in American politics historically. Apparently, Roger Stone cast Hernandez as a victim of leftist lawfare in Honduras and President Biden's administration. He told Axios he reached out to Trump, Roger Stone, and reiterated those points. Stone claimed a pardon announcement would energize the National Party in Honduras and called Trump's attention to Hernandez's 4-page letter begging for clemency. In his letter to Trump, Hernandez praised President Trump. "Quote, I found strength from you, sir, your resilience to get back to that great office, notwithstanding the persecution and prosecution you faced." And he talks about working closely with President Trump during his first term. And then he blamed Biden-Harris and their DOJ. Okay, now, again, a 45-year sentence for drug trafficking, up to and including taking bribes from El Chapo, that is not, a false prosecution based on mortgage statements or inflation of real estate assets. That's not what this is. So it's bizarre. Caroline Leavitt over at the White House claimed that Hernandez was set up, which, again, no evidence has been provided to that idea.
Cherry picking the president's statement a little bit yesterday, as he also said yesterday the people of Honduras have highlighted to him how the former president Hernandez was set up. This was a clear Biden over prosecution. He was the president of this country. He was in the opposition party. He was opposed to the values of the previous administration, and they charged him because he was president of Honduras. There were some other egregious facts that came out during this trial, and I would encourage you to report on them.
Now, the president himself put out a statement saying that Hernandez was treated, quote, very harshly and unfairly in his conviction, while also praising Nasri Asfoura, who's a candidate for the Honduran presidency and leader of the National Party. Maybe this is played as a way to sort of boost that party. But again, I see just because Joe Biden presided over a thing, and believe me, you don't have to look very far to find my critiques of Joe Biden, who I think is perhaps the worst president in modern American history. I don't see the evidence that this person was, quote unquote, set up. Many things can be true at once. A person can be a political opponent of an administration and also guilty of crimes with which he was charged. So this is a strange move at the very least. And again, there are people like Roger Stone that exist in both parties. Using them as sources for your information, I think, is a dicey move at best. Now, speaking of criminality, like actual criminality, according to the New York Post, a powerful U.S. House committee and the Treasury Department have now both launched investigations into Minnesota Governor Tim Walz's role in that massive fraud scheme in the Somali community that we talked about just yesterday on the program. James Comer, the House Oversight Committee chairman, told the New York Post his panel will, quote, conduct a thorough investigation into Governor Walz's failure to safeguard taxpayer dollars. As a result, he said that Walz was warned about massive fraud in that pandemic food aid program, but he failed to act, even though whistleblowers were whistleblowing and they raised concerns. He says, Comer, that they faced retaliation. So it'll be interesting to see if a criminal indictment is in fact brought against Walz for some sort of corruption. Presumably, it can't just be bad politicking. It can't just be he was bad at his job. You'd actually have to show money changed hands or he was doing it for corrupt political purposes or something like that. Last year, Republicans on the House Education and Workforce Committee issued a subpoena to Walz for records. It's unclear what information his office provided at this point. And again, some of the money that was being defrauded from the federal government ended up being sent to terrorists at al-Shabaab in Somalia, like remitted over to Somalia. Full disaster area for Tim Walz. Remember, that person was almost vice president of the United States, which is really quite shocking. Meanwhile, hubbub continues over the National Guard shooting, the murder of one National Guard member and the critical wounding of another by an Afghan refugee. Caroline Leavitt at the White House, she says that the National Guard shooting shows that the mass deportations that President Trump has talked about must proceed.
According to a new Bombshell report from the New York Times, Somalian migrants in Minnesota have defrauded nearly $1 billion in taxpayer-funded benefits under Democrat Governor Walz's leadership. President Trump is putting an end to this dangerous America Last approach. His position is rooted in common sense. In the wake of last week's atrocity, it is more important than ever to finish carrying out the president's mass deportation operation. America cannot allow millions upon millions of unvetted illegal aliens to be rewarded with amnesty after they broke our nation's laws to come here. They must go back to their home countries.
Okay, so again, this is a very strong case being made by the Trump administration, and of course, it is not wrong. Now, one of the complicating factors, as we discussed yesterday about this particular terrorist who, again, shot two members of the National Guard, is that this person was, in fact, part of a CIA program and should have been vetted when he came into the country and then was granted full asylum by the Trump administration in 2025. The story isn't quite as clear-cut as I think the White House is trying to make it out to be here. Here's Caroline Leavitt talking about the background of the shooter.
A foreign terrorist that the Biden administration failed to properly vet ambushed two members of the West Virginia National Guard who were honorably serving here to keep the residents and visitors of Washington, D.C. safe. U.S. Air Force Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf was severely wounded in the attack and remains hospitalized while he continues to fight for his life. Tragically, U.S. Army Specialist Sarah Beckstrom died of her wounds. She was just 20 years old. President Trump and the entire White House are praying for Andrew's full recovery at the request of his parents and their personal phone call with the president over the weekend. And we are keeping Sarah's family and friends in our prayers during this unimaginably difficult time.
As I said on Friendly Fire yesterday, you can watch our brand new episode. It's me, Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles, talking about these issues. There are really two issues here that need to be contemplated. One is, of course, the mass migration issue. And the Trump administration is right. Importing tens of thousands of people from places like Somalia or Afghanistan into the United States is a crazy idea. It's crazy. You can't vet all those people. Even if you do vet them for terror ties, for example, that doesn't mean that they are going to be ripe candidates for assimilation into American values. And so the Trump administration is totally right about that. The other question, of course, is that this particular person was, in fact, apparently radicalized while in the United States. Supposedly he showed up being relatively pro-America and then was radicalized into radical Islam. And this has been a long-standing problem, as we mentioned yesterday on the show. That is going to require actual significant resources deployed by the FBI and DOJ to investigate domestic constituencies here in the United States and organizations that actually spread Islamic radicalism. That is a very real thing happening in the United States. I will say that, on immigration, there's no question the Republicans have an advantage. They particularly have an advantage when the left continues to maintain that mass migration itself is some sort of inherent good. So yesterday, for example, Caroline Leavitt was asked by a reporter if refugees add to our national identity, which is kind of a bizarre framing of the question.
Can you explain what you mean by our nation's national identity and integrity and character, and how would refugees, people coming from war-torn places who are seeking a safe haven in America, like many of our forebears in this room, not add to our nation's integrity and character of our national identity?
I'll tell you what does not add to our nation's character and integrity is refugees who come here under the alleged plight of asylum and fleeing persecution and then come to the United States to abuse our system and rip off American taxpayers. And as I pointed out, the New York Times, to their credit, it was about 6 months too late, but they did write about how Somali immigrants in Minnesota have been ripping off American taxpayers.
Now, the reality is the immigration perspective of the Trump administration is not only popular broad scale with Americans, the idea that, no, we should not be importing tens of thousands of people from third world countries. it may be the most popular element among fellow Republicans. It may be the glue that binds together the Republican coalition. One of the big questions that's happening inside sort of Republicandom right now is what is the future of the Republican coalition beyond President Trump? Because obviously he's termed out in 2028. Fascinating study by Manhattan Institute looking at what Republicans believe about a wide variety of issues. It's a new national survey. It's 3,000 voters, including large oversamples of Black and Hispanic Republicans and 2024 Trump voters who were asked about a wide range of policy issues. And sort of fascinating. So they broke down the Republican Party into a couple of categories. Core Republicans, these would be long-standing GOP voters who consistently back Republican presidential nominees since 2016 or earlier. And new entrant Republicans, these would be people who are recent first-time GOP presidential voters, including people who supported Democrats in 2016 or 2020. And it's sort of fascinating to look at where people are on the issues in the Republican Party. So, for example, on taxes and spending, by a 2-to-1 margin, this is the broad spectrum GOP, meaning everyone who voted for Trump basically in 2024, believe that nobody should pay higher taxes. We should cut spending because government is ineffective at spending money. It's 63% of current GOP voters. Core Republicans back spending cuts 71 to 26. But new entrant Republicans, these are people who voted Trump for the first time in 2024, for example, actually favor higher taxes. Right? This is a major gap in the Republican Party, is the gap between sort of core Republican beliefs and the people who are now joining the Republican Party and disagree on, for example, taxes. When it comes to social issues, there is very little disagreement, actually, on some of these social issues. The current GOP coalition is a little split, according to the Manhattan Institute. A plurality, 42%, say the party should fight for traditional values across the board. 1 in 4 believes the party should push back on super woke stuff, but accept that some debates like total abortion bans or reversing same-sex marriage are no longer on the table. So at the very least, this would be, moderate to very conservative GOP people on conservative issues. That represents a vast majority of the party. But only 25% of the current GOP under the age of 50 believe the party should fight for traditional values across the board, which is, again, quite fascinating. It's illegal immigration that really puts everything together. On illegal migration, the current GOP coalition is totally unified. Only 3% say illegal immigrants should not be deported at all. 37% say as many as possible. 1 in 3 support deportations, but say they should be doing it carefully. And 22% say deportations focus mainly on criminals. When it comes to legal immigration, there is pretty significant debate. Only 1 in 10 current GOP believe high-skilled legal immigration should be decreased. Nearly half say it should be kept at its current level. 35% say it should be increased, actually. But 47% of new entrant Republicans support increasing high-skilled immigration versus just 31% of core Republicans. So this is one of, again, several areas where these kind of new entrant Republicans are more progressive than the old guard Republicans. These are very real gaps, and it's pretty fascinating to watch them play out in real time. But immigration is the thing that is sort of binding everybody together. Now, the problem for the Trump administration and probably for the Republican Party going forward is that Trump successfully shut the border. And because he successfully shut the border, that issue has sort of disappeared as a glue binding together Republicans. You can see why the Trump administration, politically speaking, and forget about the morality, where I agree with them. Politically speaking, they're focusing on immigration because it may be the sort of one area of broad agreement all the way across the Republican spectrum. One of the big issues that's going to have to be dealt with the Republican Party is whether it is the new entrant Republicans, the new entrant GOPs who occasionally vote for Republicans, who are going to be the ones who dictate the terms going forward for the Republican coalition, or whether it is the people who traditionally are the people who tend to vote Republican. Because in the end, President Trump is able to sail over all of this. He sort of signals and in affect is very much a new entrant GOP. He used to be a Democrat, for example, but in his policy, he is very traditional GOP. President Trump is one of one. I'm not sure there's a candidate out there on the Republican side. And again, this is not a critique of any one candidate who's capable of holding all of that together without sounding as though they're promising everything to everyone all the time. At a certain point, leadership is going to be required to define what the coalition looks like going forward. And it can't just be, hey, coalition. It's got to be actual values that define the coalition. And again, the reason that I became a conservative when I was very, very young, and I voted Republican in every single election in which I have ever voted. The only election that I sat out was 2016. And I did so because I didn't know Trump was going to be a conservative. And then, of course, he ended up being quite conservative. And I was wearing a MAGA hat by January of 2017 when he appointed Neil Gorsuch to the bench. Okay, so as a longtime Republican, like my entire life, I can say that if the Republican Party shifts away from traditional values and starts catering to sort of the new entrant values, they're going to lose a lot of people who actually are not on that same side. Now, again, when it comes to elections, coalitions have to be broad. That obviously is true. The problem that I see for Republicans going forward is that many of the issues that President Trump ran on are being solved. The most unifying aspects of the coalition are immigration and trans. Both of those issues have been largely dealt with by the Trump administration. And Democrats are running headlong away from those issues. So Republicans are going to have to define what it is they stand for going forward if they hope to win in 2028 or even in 2026. Okay, meanwhile, the red flags are beginning to signal on the economy internationally, not just in the United States. According to the Wall Street Journal, U.S. markets are facing a threat from across the Pacific. Yields on government debt, which rises when the prices of those bonds fall, climbed across the world on Monday after the Bank of Japan governor hinted at a potential interest rate increase later this month, surprising investors who thought he might hold off under possible pressure from the country's new prime minister. So the yield is dropping on the current government bonds in Japan. So people are worried that those new bond yields are going to draw money from U.S. investments and then spark a climb in treasury yields. So basically the interest rates on the new bonds are going to be increased. That means people are not buying the old bonds in Japan. They're going to start buying, presumably, the new bonds in Japan. They're going to move their money from American bonds over to Japanese higher interest bonds. The world's third largest economy is the U.S. government's largest foreign creditor, according to the Treasury Department data, holding treasuries valued at about $1.2 trillion as of September. Private Japanese investors poured hundreds of billions of dollars into the U.S. and other foreign bonds in recent years, seeking better returns than they could find at home. For most of this year, that dynamic has not actually played out. Japanese bond yields have climbed as investors there prepare for higher rates. Yields on treasuries, meanwhile, have fallen as the Federal Reserve moves in the opposite direction. So things are getting a little dicey. U.S. stocks fell on Monday. The S&P 500 dropped 0.5%. Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 427 points. Again, I'm not sure that anyone has an excellent read on where the economy is going next. It just, for the last year, essentially, it feels as though the economy is sort of, on a razor's edge, and we're not sure exactly which direction it is moving. What is very clear is that investors also don't know which direction the economy is moving. They don't know whether to put money in Japan or in the United States, certainly not in Europe, which has a dying economy. Europe destroyed its own economy on the shoals of green energy nonsense. So, where do you put your money? That remains a very open question at this point. Alrighty, folks, the show is continuing for our members right now. We'll get into the latest in Ukraine talks. Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us. A huge piece in Compact magazine exposes how white men were discriminated against in the job market from 2014 on, the wages of DEI, plus healthcare imbroglios for Republicans, and, of course, a profile of Susie Wiles at Vanity Fair that's creating waves on the Hill. First, the Daily Wire Plus Christmas sale, it's happening right this very instant. New memberships are 40% off. Gift memberships are 50% off. Daily Wire Plus is the only place you get ad-free, uncensored shows from the most trusted names in conservative media every single day. And your membership also includes unlimited access to our premium entertainment, including the upcoming 7-part epic, The Pendragon Cycle Rise of the Merlin, with early access to episodes 1 and 2 starting Christmas Day. The Christmas sale is live right now. 40% off new memberships, 50% off gift memberships. Go to dailywire.com/subscribe and join today. So one of the big questions that has plagued American politics for the last decade and a half is what the hell is going on? And in order to understand what the hell is going on, I think we need to understand the transformation that happened around the year 2014. Between 2012 and 2014, something radically changed in American politics. Now, some of that is the rise of social media. Obviously, this is something that the social psychologist Jonathan Haidt of NYU has discussed ad nauseum, is the idea that because we're all addicted to our phones, because we are able to find our own little cliques of people on the internet and then zoom around headlines, both true and untrue, this means that we have sort of poisoned our own brains. And there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, I've talked at length about how algorithms are feeding you information that may not be true and generally is going to confirm your pre-existing biases. But there's something else that happened too, and that's a real world thing. That real world thing is the rise of DEI. So in 2012, which again, I still consider 2012 to be the most important election of my lifetime, the one that everybody forgets. That's the one that I think was really important. Why? Well, because in 2008, Barack Obama, America's first black president, was elected on the platform of unifying Americans around race. And racial optimism in the country was at an all-time high by the polling data. And then in 2012, Barack Obama, who had been a very left-wing president, a very progressive president, of course, he had pushed Obamacare through with the skin of his teeth, and he was unpopular. And so he decided that the best way to win re-election was not to broadcast a unifying message, but to divide Americans by race, and then to cobble together enough racial coalitions in order to win a victory. And he defeated Mitt Romney, the most milquetoast candidate in the history of American politics, in what was a fairly solid victory. And that seemed to change everything, because by 2014, race relations in the United States were on the decline. And they were on the decline because Barack Obama, who'd made a lot of promises to a lot of people, needed to fulfill those promises, particularly on issues of race. The claim that Barack Obama made with regard to, for example, Trayvon Martin, is that Trayvon could have been his son. That was a racial claim, because what he was claiming, of course, is that any black person would have been subjected to the same treatment as Trayvon Martin, that circumstances did not matter. He said the same thing with regard to Ferguson, Missouri, where he claimed that nobody would make up the kinds of experiences that Michael Brown had undergone. And it turned out that in Ferguson, Missouri, Michael Brown's acolytes, people who were pseudo-witnesses, actually did, in fact, make up the story about Michael Brown claiming that he had raised his hands up, don't shoot, and all of the rest. And so race relations by 2014 were on a steep decline in the United States, and they have never recovered. And that is because so much of this attitude, this racially divisive attitude, was then baked into American politics. There's a fascinating and important piece today in Compact Magazine by a person named Jacob Savage talking about the realities of hiring and firing in the sort of elite institutions of the United States, which became explicitly race-based around 2014. He points out, quote, "The doors seem to close everywhere and all at once. In 2011, the year I moved to Los Angeles, white men were 48% of lower-level TV writers. By 2024, they accounted for just 11.9%. The Atlantic's editorial staff went from 53% male and 89% white in 2013 to 36% male and 66% white in 2024. White men fell from 39% of tenure-track positions in the humanities at Harvard in 2014 to 18% in 2023. Now, again, there are people who are DEI advocates who will claim that this is the natural state of things. The natural state of things is that white people were being artificially elevated, and then when that ended, thanks to DEI, of course, white people fell out of positions of power. But the reality is sort of the reverse, that if you believe that America has been, for at least a couple of generations, generally a meritocracy, particularly on issues of race, that when you go back to sort of how hiring was done in TV studios, for example, some of the most left-leaning areas in American life in 2011, it wasn't that the heads of the writers' room were selecting for white people. It was that they were selecting for the funniest people. And then they decided to radically shift how they did hiring and firing, thus to dispossess people of the positions that they had earned in favor of other people based on group characteristics. You can see what happened here. As Jacob Savage writes, in retrospect, 2014 was the hinge, the year DEI became institutionalized across American life. In industry after industry, gatekeepers promised extra consideration to anyone who wasn't a white man, and then provided just that. A former management consultant recalled, quote, "With every announcement of promotions, there is a desire to put extra emphasis on gender or race. And when you don't fall into those groups, that message gets louder and louder and gains more and more emphasis. On the one hand, you want to celebrate people who have been at a disadvantage. On the other hand, you look and you say, wow, the world is not rooting for you. In fact, it's deliberately rooting against you." As the Trump administration takes a chainsaw to diversity, equity, and inclusion apparatus, there's a tendency to portray DEI as a series of well-meaning but ineffectual HR modules. But that's not real. This may be how Boomer and Gen X white men experienced DEI, but for white male millennials, DEI was not a gentle rebalancing. It was a profound shift in how power and prestige were distributed. Jacob Savage says this isn't a story about all white men. It's a story about white male millennials in professional America. He points out, it may be hard to remember now, but a decade ago, the prevailing critique of American journalism was that it was woefully lacking in racial and gender diversity. Gawker, as of 2014, was still 57% male and 79% white. Vice was majority male and 70% white. At 538, Nate Silver complained about a gender gap so severe that only 15% of applications were from women. However, this was all about to change. There was a move that was about to be made because there was a move by the upper levels of management to try to diversify. And what that meant is that people who were white male millennials were going to be basically pushed out of these institutions. Institutions pursuing diversity decided there would be no backsliding. If a position was vacated by a woman or a person of color, the expectation was that it would be filled by another woman or person of color. The hope was always that you were going to hire a diverse candidate, a senior hiring editor at a major outlet told me. If there was a black woman at the beginning of her career you wanted to hire, you could find someone. But if she was any good, you knew she'd get accelerated to the New York Times or the Washington Post in short order. By 2019, the newsrooms of ProPublica, the Washington Post, and the New York Times were majority female, as were new media upstarts Vice, Vox, BuzzFeed, and the Huffington Post. And then 2020 happened, and the wheels came off. In the aftermath of George Floyd's death, writes Savage, newsrooms tripped over themselves to stage a reckoning. The New York Times solemnly promised sweeping reforms on top of the sweeping reforms it had already promised. The Washington Post declared it would become the most diverse and inclusive newsroom in the country. CNN pledged a sustained commitment to race coverage. Bon Appetit confessed, quote, our mastheads have been far too white for far too long. NPR said diversity was nothing less than its North Star. And this resulted in differential hiring practices, unsurprisingly. In 2021, new hires at Condé Nast were just 25% male and 49% white. At the California Times, parent company of the LA Times and the San Diego Union Tribune, they were 39% male and 31% white. That same year, ProPublica hired 66% women and 58% people of color. At NPR, 78% of new hires were people of color. At The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg had described his hiring philosophy, quote, by opening the possibilities of younger people, women, and people of color, by imagining their rise in a deliberate way, I've just widened the pool of potential leadership. There's no quota system here. But he said, quote, it's really, really hard to write a 10,000-word cover story. There are not a lot of journalists in America who can do it. The journalists in America who do it are almost exclusively white males. And yet, The Atlantic succeeded in hiring fewer and fewer of these white males. Since 2020, nearly 2/3 of The Atlantic's hires have been women, along with nearly 50% people of color. So what you see is a deliberate attempt to force white millennials out. This is also true with regard to the universities, not just in legacy media. All right, coming up more on America's DEI episode. First, this episode is sponsored by Birch Gold. Our first advertiser at the Daily Wire was Birch Gold Group. In that time, we've helped thousands of Daily Wire listeners diversify into physical gold. Talk about peace of mind, especially when you see gold up over 50% this year. In all that time, the most successful promotion we've ever run with Birch Gold was the 24-karat gold-plated Truth Bomb. That's our version of a bunker buster on leftist ideology. Well, we happen to have an extremely limited number of them in cold storage. Right now, until they're gone, with a qualifying purchase from Birch Gold, you can own a Daily Wire Golden Truth Bomb. Let Birch Gold help you convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in gold. And if your purchase qualifies, they'll send you a Golden Truth Bomb. I bought more gold from Birch Gold this year. I was a little bit wary of what I see as a burgeoning bubble. And so I called them up, got all my questions answered, and now that gold sits safely in my safe. With rate cuts from the Fed in 2026, the dollar will likely be worth even less. And what happens if that AI bubble does indeed burst? Diversify. Just text my name, Ben, to 989898 and claim your eligibility before December 22nd. Don't wait. Text Ben to the number 989898 today, because Birch Gold will run out of those Golden Truth Bombs. Text Ben to 989898. Also, anywhere worth going is worth going in good boots. Our sponsor, Tecovas, makes finding your perfect pair easy. Whether you're a generational rancher, a lifelong cowboy, or you're just trying on your first pair of boots, Tecovas crafts quality Western footwear for everyone. With over 200 meticulously crafted steps, their boots deliver that broken-in comfort from the very first day you put them on. Plus, their in-store experience is second to none. Think expert staff, complimentary beverages, and free customizations to make your boots truly yours. Looking for that perfect holiday gift? Tecovas has you covered with their handcrafted cowboy boots that feel amazing right out of the box. No break-in period needed. Whether you're shopping for somebody's first pair or their 50th, they've got an incredible selection of leathers to choose from classic cowhide to exotic options like ostrich and caiman. Each boot is made by hand in Leon, Mexico, through over 200 meticulous steps. And the best part, they come in every size and style imaginable, because over at Tecovas, y'all really does mean all. Beyond boots, you'll also find a great range of apparel, bags, belts, wallets for both men and women. If you're near one of their 50-plus stores nationwide, stop by this holiday season. It's the perfect escape from the chaos. Grab a specialty pour, chat with their friendly staff. Take advantage of their complimentary boot branding to make your gift truly one of a kind. I love my Tecovas. I mean, look at me. Do I look like a boot guy? And yet, here I am, sitting and liking my Tecovas boots because that's how good they are. Right now, get 10% off at tecovas.com/Shapiro when you sign up for email and text. That's 10% off at tecovas.com/Shapiro. That's tecovas.com/Shapiro. See site for details. Tecovas. Point your toes west. There is a push to, quote unquote, diversify all of the institutions of higher education. As Savage points out, white men may still be 55% of Harvard's arts and sciences faculty, down from 63% a decade ago, but this is a legacy of Boomer and Gen X employment patterns. For tenure-track positions, the pipeline for future faculty, white men have gone from 49% in 2014 to 27% in 2024, and in the humanities, from 39% to 21%. The white men who do get hired are often older and more established, or foreign. Meanwhile, Yale's history department, with 10 white male professors over the age of 70, provides a striking illustration of the generational divide in hiring. Since 2018, Yale has hired 4 older white men as full professors, but among the 16 tenured or tenure-track millennials, just 1 is a white man. The remedial action takes many forms. Berkeley commissioned regression analyses to identify which quasi-legal strategies would produce the fewest number of white male job offers. At Dartmouth, the Mellon to Postdoc program provided 10 tenure-track positions for new hires with a demonstrated commitment to addressing racial underrepresentation in their disciplines, and none were white men. So again, this has become de rigueur across the university system. At Berkeley, as recently as 2015, white male hires were 52.7% of new tenure-track faculty. In 2023, they were 21.5%. This is true in the preserve of television as well. A whistleblower sent Jacob Savage a document from early 2017, an internal needs sheet compiled by Major Talent Agency that shows how steep the headwinds were for white males across the grid, which tracks staffing needs for TV writers' rooms. The same shorthand appears dozens of times: diverse, female, women, and diverse only. These mandates came from some of the most powerful names in television: Noah Hawley, Dean Devlin, Ryan Murphy. This was systematic discrimination documented in writing, implemented without consequence. It's striking how casual it all was. For example, Chicago Fire. The upper level can be anyone, but we need diverse staff writers. As in other industries, the upper level positions were filled by people with gigantic resumes, very often of whom they were older white males. But the entry level jobs, the way that people actually got ahead, there was a glass ceiling put in place. Every fellowship grant and hiring incentive was suddenly skewed toward changing who got in the door. So you're looking at the media, you're looking at institutions of higher education, you're looking at Hollywood, and everywhere else. So as Jacob Savage puts it, for a decade, it kept going faster and faster without any actual quotas to achieve, only the constant exhortation to do better. The diversity complex became self-radicalizing, a strange confluence of top-down and bottom-up pressure. No one ever said what the right number of white men would be, but it was always fewer than you currently had. Over the course of the 2010s, nearly every mechanism liberal America used to confer prestige was reweighted along identitarian lines. 7 white male Gen Xers won the MacArthur Genius Fellowship in 2013 alone, the same as the total number of white male millennials who have won since. In 2014, 2 white male millennials were National Book Award finalists, including one winner. That year, 9 white male American artists under 40 appeared at the Whitney Biennial. But of the 70 millennial writers nominated for National Book Awards in the decade that followed, 3 were white men. The Big Four galleries represent 47 millennial artists. 3 are white men. At the 2024 Whitney Biennial, which featured 45 millennial artists, 0 were white American men. The shift has happened everywhere, including in medicine. In 2014, white men were 31% of American medical students. By 2025, they were 20.5%. That's true in tech as well. At Google, white men went from nearly half the workforce in 2014 to less than a third by 2024, a 34% decline. In 2014, at Amazon, entry-level professionals were 42.3% white male. Mid-level managers fell from 55.8% white male in 2014 to 33.8% in 2024. So, refuges were formed: crypto, podcasting, Substack. But the bottom line is that when you're talking about one job and one person is going to get that one job, you've created a zero-sum game. And if that zero-sum game is being weighted in favor of particular races, that is unfair and wrong. And the reaction to that on parts of the political right has been a reverse identitarianism. See, people of my generation, and I am a millennial, I believe. I'm 41. People of my generation, we were brought up in the 1990s, early 2000s, and we were taught from a very, very early age that Martin Luther King Jr.'s exhortation to judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, was morally correct, because it is, in fact, morally correct. And then an entire cadre of elite institutional professionals decided not to do that anymore. And not only not to do that, they decided that the majority, in many cases, of potential employees in a potential applicant pool were bad because of the immutable characteristics, the color of their skin, because of their maleness. The idea was that these people were somehow lesser, that they had participated in systemic discrimination. And even if they themselves were not racist, the system was racist. And thus, these people had to be dispossessed. They took the most tolerant cohort of people who had been trained in the idea of a colorblind meritocracy. And then they told them that colorblind meritocracy was for them, but it wasn't for anyone else. They were told that they should continue to adhere to an idea of colorblind meritocracy because it was morally correct, but they were the beneficiaries of racialist systems, and therefore they had to pay. That is unsustainable. There's one system for everyone. And if you are told that colorblind meritocracy is something that you should morally accept, which is true, and then you are told it doesn't apply to you, it only applies to everyone else, well, you are likely to get a generation of people who start to reject a colorblind meritocracy and start to look at race relations as a zero-sum game rather than an additive bonus, who start to see everything as a question of who gets the job and why is it based on immutable characteristics, and who start to see themselves as a put-upon identity group because, in fact, they are a put-upon identity group. If a group is determined to be lesser than on the basis of immutable characteristics, of course they're going to start seeing themselves in identitarian ways. Now, that doesn't mean that they are right to do so. It does mean, however, that the only way to destroy all of this new identitarian moment we are living in, and an identitarianism of the left that adheres to the idea that group identity is really, really good, except if you're talking about white Christian men, and an identitarian right that is formed in counter-response that says, fine, you want to play that game, we'll play that game too. The only way out of that is to go back to a system that we were all taught as kids and that was natural to us, colorblind meritocracy. Colorblind meritocracy is good. It is right. Why? Because meritocracy is the only system of human relations ever devised that has positive externalities. Meaning that when the most meritorious people, the people who are best at the job, get jobs, you get greater efficiency. You get better job performance. You get better innovation, better products. People are able to expend their best abilities to the benefit of everyone else. Every other system, every other anti-meritocratic system has negative externalities. It helps the people who are inside the system and hurts the people who are outside the system. Meritocracy benefits everyone because even if you didn't get the job, let's say you lost the job to a person who is better qualified than you, better at the job than you. Well, number one, that means that the person who filled the job is going to perform the job better than you would have. And so that company will do better. They will perform better. The prices will be better. The products will be better. And second, you will end up in a job where you are most meritorious. If you want a happier human society, meritocracy is the way. And yet we were told that meritocracy is inherently bad. Why? Because people looked at the outcome numbers and they judged for themselves that if outcomes were not equal, therefore the system was unequal and bad. If you don't use a meritocracy, then you have to prejudge. Either you are going to judge a system based on the effects of the system, or you're going to prejudge a system based on your perception of fairness between groups. Cosmic justice, as Thomas Sowell would put it. And there is nothing just about the idea that a person should be hampered in their capacity to succeed because of their immutable characteristics. That is just wrong. That's why this article is really important. It explains an awful lot about our current political moment. And it does say that we need to end grievance-based politics. Grievance-based politics need to end. Yes, white, male, American, millennials, Christians have reason for grievance. The solution to that grievance is meritocracy. It is not, in fact, reverse grievance. Because otherwise we're just going to ping pong between grievances. And it's just a question of who grabs the government gun and crams down their preferred solution today. That is not what America was built on. It is not what is going to cause America to succeed. And again, the negative externalities of the DEI system have been felt everywhere, from the social sphere to the job sphere to the governmental sphere. And that spiral will keep on swirling the drain unless we reverse it and go back to, again, the thing that we all taught our kids, the thing that we were taught as kids, to treat every individual human being as an individual and not on the basis of some sort of immutable characteristic. It was a sin against America what happened over the course of the last decade. A sin against decency. And the fact that so many people are still invested in that sin, or who now want to pursue the same sin but with a different color at the top, all of that does not speak to a successful America. Alrighty, coming up, we are going to get to Susie Wiles. She is profiled in Vanity Fair and has some things to say about the administration that are kind of fascinating. First, this episode is sponsored by Good Ranchers. You know what I miss most when I'm traveling for work? Sitting down with my wife and kids for a real meal. Not just eating, actually being together. That's why this holiday season, I encourage everybody to give a Good Ranchers box to the people you care about. Because here's the thing. A Good Ranchers gift isn't just premium 100% American-raised meat. It's an invitation. The box shows up, someone fires up the grill or preheats a skillet or the oven, and suddenly everybody is gathered around the table, talking, laughing, actually connecting. That's what the holidays are really about. Savvy and her family, they enjoy the Good Ranchers. Her baby is a big boy. He's a big boy because of that Good Ranchers meat. Spend less time prepping holiday meals this season and more time with the people you love. Gifting a Good Ranchers box is simple. Just pick a box, add a note, schedule delivery. And while you're at goodranchers.com, grab a subscription for yourself. Use my code BEN for $40 off plus. When you subscribe, you get free bacon, free Wagyu burgers, or free chicken thighs in every order for the rest of your life. That's code BEN at goodranchers.com for $40 off plus free meat for life. Goodranchers.com. Let's get back to the table. That's goodranchers.com. Also, I found that when it comes to updating your home, details make a gigantic difference. Maybe you've thought about upgrading your window treatments, but let's face it, the hassle usually just isn't worth it. All that waiting around for designer, sky-high quotes, trying to coordinate installation, give anybody a headache. Well, that's why I want to tell you about our sponsor, Blinds.com. Blinds.com totally changed my outlook on home updates. Instead of waiting around for appointments, you can browse their huge selection and even talk to an expert from the comfort of your own home. You want somebody to measure and install? They'll handle everything. Prefer to do it yourself? You still have expert support every step of the way. Their samples show up fast, free, and picking the perfect color or texture is really simple. Whether you're looking for bamboo shades, classic shutters, or even outdoor options for the patio, they've got you covered, all for the price that beats the showroom every single time. The best part? No stress, just a simple process with a 100% satisfaction guarantee from the folks who've been doing this for 29 years and have covered over 25 million windows. Right now, Blinds.com is giving our listeners an exclusive $50 off when you spend $500 or more. Just use code Shapiro at checkout. Limited time offer. Rules and restrictions apply. See Blinds.com for details. Again, that's Blinds.com. Go check out their exclusive offer today. Okay, meanwhile, the other big controversy of the day is an interview series that Susie Wiles, the president's chief of staff, did with Vanity Fair. So I just have a question. Number one, why are you doing big interviews with Vanity Fair? It seems to me that at this point, if you're a member of the Trump administration, you should well know at this point that Vanity Fair is probably going to take the spiciest things that you say about your colleagues and put them in print. I mean, Vanity Fair was apparently taping the interviews. And so Susie Wiles said some pretty spicy things about the administration. So there are kind of two issues. One is why Susie Wiles would do that. That's less interesting to me, frankly, than what Susie Wiles actually said. Because whenever you get a window into a room that is typically closed, it's interesting to see what the people inside the room are saying. Why Susie Wiles would do that? I mean, I assume that the president knew about it. I assume that she wasn't freelancing it. I assume that there is some rationale for why she wanted to go talk to the people at Vanity Fair, presumably because she figured, okay, if they write a hit piece about the administration, then the administration will survive it. The administration always survives hit pieces. And maybe, just maybe, Vanity Fair will actually do some sort of decent coverage. Maybe that was the logic. Maybe on a personal political level, Susie Wiles is looking beyond this term, and she's figuring, okay, maybe I'm not inside the J.D. Vance team, and I'm sort of auditioning for another role. You know, it's unclear what is driving Susie Wiles to do that interview. What's much more interesting to me is what Susie Wiles actually said. So first of all, we should point out that she appears to be in no danger of losing her job over this. According to the New York Post, President Trump defended White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles. So apparently in this interview, she said that Trump has an alcoholic's personality, meaning that he is, hyperactive and obsessive. And Trump said, no, she meant that I don't drink alcohol. Everybody knows that. I've often said that if I did, I'd have a very good chance of being an alcoholic. I've said that many times about myself. I do. It's a very possessive personality. I said that many times about myself. I'm fortunate I'm not a drinker. If I did, I could very well, because I've said, what's the word, not possessive? Possessive and addictive type of personality. Oh, I've said it many times before. In the profile, Wiles told author Chris Whipple that high-functioning alcoholics, or alcoholics in general, that personalities are exaggerated when they drink, and that the president has an alcoholic's personality because he operates with a view that there's nothing he can't do. And so the president defended her. He said, I didn't read it, but I don't read Vanity Fair, but she's done a fantastic job. I think from what I hear, the facts were wrong. It was a very misguided interviewer, purposefully misguided. And he said that she is fantastic. He said he thought Whipple may have deceived Wiles regarding his focus. Yeah, deceived. He didn't have great access, a couple of very short interviews. And Susie generally doesn't do interviews. If anybody knows the interviewer, if they know Vanity Fair is it's lost its way. It's also lost its readers, as you know. No, she's fantastic. Well, Susie Wiles also had some words about, for example, the vice president of the United States. She said that J.D. Vance was a conspiracy theorist for a decade, which is sort of fascinating because obviously the vice president of the United States has some fairly warm relations with people who are themselves warm on conspiracies. She also said that Attorney General Pam Bondi whiffed in her handling of the Epstein files, which of course is perfectly true. And so again, there's sort of two issues: why she talked to Vanity Fair and if she said what she said was true. So apparently Vance then went out and defended her. He claimed the only conspiracies he believes are the true ones, which, maybe.
And I've seen so many people who will say one thing to the president's face, Democrats and Republicans, and then will do the exact opposite behind the scenes. You know why I really, you know what they are, and you know why I really love Susie Wiles? Because Susie is who she is in the president's presence. She's the same exact person when the president isn't around. I've never seen Susie Wiles say something to the president and then go and counteract him or subvert his will behind the scenes.
Okay, so Susie Wiles herself put out a statement saying that the Vanity Fair series was a disingenuously framed hit piece. Quote, significant context was disregarded, and much of what I and others said about the team and the president was left out of the story. I assume after reading it that this was done to paint an overwhelmingly chaotic and negative narrative about the president and our team. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt came out and dismissed the article. Here's what she had to say.
This was, unfortunately, another attempt at fake news by a reporter who was acting disingenuously and really did take the chief's words out of context. But I think most importantly, the bias of omission was ever present throughout this story. The reporter omitted all of the positive things that Susie and our team said about the president and the inner workings of the White House. And as Susie said today, it's deeply unfortunate that happened, but it won't distract us from making America great again.
Is this going to have any lasting impact? The answer is no, but it's sort of a fascinating thing. Apparently, Wiles said the president believes that Russian President Vladimir Putin won't be satisfied with getting part of Ukraine. Quote, Donald Trump thinks he wants the whole country. So once again, demonstrating that President Trump's instincts are very often better than his staff's. President Trump is correct about all of this. Apparently, in April, when Trump announced the Liberation Day tariffs, Wiles said the White House struggled to agree on an approach. Wiles tried to convince the president to wait to roll out his sweeping tariffs until there was more unity among his advisors, but Trump forged ahead anyway. So, will there be internal fallout? Probably not. The president does a good job of keeping a lid on sort of internal dissension inside his team. However, do I believe that Susie Wiles and the team at the White House had no idea that Vanity Fair was going to pursue some sort of hit piece? I find that very, very difficult to believe. Okay, meanwhile, the president obviously is having a tough time in the approval ratings right now. A huge part of that is based on concerns about affordability. And as I've said before, affordability is sort of a weasel word. It encompasses a lot of different things. Right now, the focus on affordability is reverting back to the focus on Obamacare. So I asked our sponsors over at Comet, a project of Perplexity, how much are the Obamacare premiums expected to rise if Obamacare subsidies expire at the end of 2025? According to Comet, if an enhanced Affordable Care Act subsidies expire at the end of 2025, average out-of-pocket premiums for people now receiving subsidies are projected to more than double in 2026, increasing by roughly 110 to 115%. In dollar terms, KFF estimates that the average annual payments would rise from about $900 in 2025 to about $1,900 in 2026 for subsidized enrollees. KFF's October 2025 analysis estimates that subsidized marketplace enrollees would see their annual premiums jump from an average of $888 to $1,904 if enhanced premium tax credits lapse. Separate from those subsidies, insurers are proposing significant 2026 rate increases with a median premium hike of about 18 to 26% for ACA plans. So you can see why, for example, Mike Lawler, who is a congressman from New York, is freaking out. Mike Lawler is suggesting that fellow Republicans are screwing this thing up. Quote, I am pissed for the American people. This is BS. That is because if the ACA subsidies expire, he maybe loses his seat. He called it idiotic not to have an up or down vote on extending the subsidies. It's political malpractice, he said. Lawler is not aligned with the leadership on the other side of the aisle. He says that Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer want the subsidies to expire so they can run on it, which is probably right. Lawler said he's open to supporting a Democratic-led discharge petition, which would force a vote on extending the subsidies, which are set to expire on December 31st. House Majority Leader, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, confirmed to reporters on Thursday that there would be no vote on ACA subsidies. He responded to Lawler by praising the lawmaker, calling him a dear friend and close colleague. The Republicans have put forward their own plan. That plan would lower the cost of healthcare something like 11%. The problem is that lowering premiums by 11% from, the otherwise gigantic jump of 125% probably is not going to be enough to save Republicans some seats. The Lower Healthcare Premiums for All Americans Act that House Republicans are pushing would increase transparency for pharmacy benefit managers, appropriate cost-sharing reduction plans that would lower premiums, expand access to health association plans that would allow self-employed workers and other membership-based organizations like Costco, Amazon, and Sam's Club to create their own health insurance pools and ensure small and mid-sized employers can protect themselves from catastrophic claims. According to the Congressional Budget Office, this would lower the benchmark health insurance premiums by 11% and save $35.6 billion through 2035, which is a little bit of money. But again, that's really not the question. Is it better than what Democrats are proposing on a pure policy level? Sure. Because continuing to subsidize these gigantic insurance schemes fostered by the Obama administration and then expanded by Joe Biden, that obviously is bad for the country and bad for the American taxpayer. But if what you are worried about is a gigantic rise in premiums that is not going to be paid for by increases in wages or by compensatory changes to regulatory structures, then, of course, you do have a political problem. Chip Roy, for his part, is very upset with this bill. He says that they should go further. Here is the Republican representative from Texas. Of course, he is extremely fiscally conservative.
And now we're sitting here and we're listening to nonsense about health care, where my colleagues on the other side of the aisle sit here saying, well, you guys aren't doing anything about the massive expensive cost of health care. Why do you think it's expensive? Because you literally cut a deal with insurance companies to run health care. You think that's going to run wild? Yeah. That's why they have 2,000% profit increases, and the American people can't afford to go to the doctor of their choice while we enrich insurance companies. And yet Republicans will complain about it, and then they'll offer milquetoast garbage like we're offering this week, and then go home at Christmas and say, look at what we're doing. We're campaigning on reducing health care. Well, congratulations.
So, again, he's not wrong on the merits. The question is, politically, are Republicans going to survive a gigantic Obamacare expansion in costs that fall on subsidized plans? The reality is that Republicans ought to create a transitional plan that probably extends the subsidies for not 3 years, for a year or 2 years, and in the meantime puts in place the sorts of changes to the regulatory structure that would allow for a massive decrease in costs or flattening of the cost curve. This, by the way, should be the Republican plan for a lot of necessary fiscal changes. The American people are not willing, listen, I wish they were. I wish the American people were willing to accept a Javier Milei-style economic reset when it comes to regulatory structures, but they're not. And so the question is, do you wish to embrace a program that is likely to lose you the House majority and therefore destroy the rest of the Trump term? Or do you wish to make a pragmatic compromise that is ugly and terrible and a result of Republican failures to provide an alternative plan over the course of the last 10 years, but also preserves a Republican majority and the possibility of a real change in the regulatory structure? That's the real question here. There really is no third choice where you get to do all the things you want and there's no political fallout. It seems that Democrats know this, which is why they are pursuing yet another government shutdown at the end of January. Chuck Schumer is saying as much. He was asked 3 times whether there will be another government shutdown in January over Obamacare subsidies. And here's what he had to say.
As I said, the bottom line is very simple, and that is that the way to solve this problem, because the toothpaste is already out of the tube, is get it done by January 1st. The Republicans, if they care so much and feel the heat, they should make sure they pass our bill. Yes.
That doesn't sound like you've arrived on a strategy for how to handle January 3rd. So is that in play? Yes or no? The health care issue the same as it was in the government shutdown this fall?
I answered the question again.
But that doesn't sound clear, though.
The bottom line is very clear. You can't do it after January 1st.
So, yeah, again, I think that Schumer and the rest of the Democrats are begging for this. They want it. They're going to run on it. That is their whole idea. All right. Meanwhile, again, the president of the United States, he is facing down some pretty significant 2026 losses if the perception of the economy goes the wrong way. Unemployment did, in fact, rise in November to 4.6%. Of course, that's not a historically high unemployment rate, but it is an increase in the unemployment rate. Now, long-delayed government report, according to the Wall Street Journal on Tuesday, showed 64,000 jobs were gained in November. 105,000 jobs were lost in October. Job losses in June, August, and October mean the U.S. economy has actually shed jobs in 3 out of the past 6 months. Taken together, the data point to one of the weakest American labor markets in years. While the economy has added jobs so far this year, mostly on the back of gains in healthcare and education, the shock of shifting trade policies and an immigration crackdown has restrained labor demand and supply, making for tepid hiring overall. Some economists and investors were putting less stock in Tuesday's job numbers because of likely distortions from the government closure, which prevented the Labor Department from collecting some data that it normally would have. We're not falling off the table by any means, but this is not a sort of booming jobs market for sure. Now, wages are in fact rising, which is interesting. So the wages continue to rise, but the job market is roiling. And this has been sort of the mood for the Trump administration for a while, is this feeling that even while things are generally going kind of pretty well, that things could fall down at any second. And I think a lot of people are feeling that right now. Meanwhile, the president of the United States is set to interview the Fed's Christopher Waller for chair. The two frontrunners are former Fed Governor Kevin Warsh and Kevin Hassett, the director of the National Economic Council. Hassett is widely considered the frontrunner. Christopher Waller was named to the Fed's board by Trump and confirmed by the Senate at the end of Trump's term in 2020, according to the Wall Street Journal. He's a leading internal advocate for rate cuts this year. He is widely considered sort of an institutionalist. So a lot of people on Wall Street would be much more comfortable with Waller than they would with, for example, Kevin Hassett. But he doesn't have the sort of personal relationship with Trump that Hassett and Warsh enjoy, which is probably why he is unlikely to be the final pick. President Trump is programming for loyalty at this point, which you understand after the amount of staff turnover that he had in the last administration. A lot of people in the administration are not super happy with the Kevin Hassett of it. According to Politico, Hassett's detractors believe he has not been effective as head of the National Economic Council other than as a public messenger for the president's agenda. He hasn't really done much in driving policy. That is causing concern. He's ill-suited to take the helm of the central bank, but that's not how Trump's going to pick. Trump does focus a lot on the messaging. It is the one thing that President Trump is a greater expert on than pretty much anything else, is his focus on messaging. And so it would not be a surprise if Kevin Hassett indeed ended up at the head of the Federal Reserve, assuming, of course, that he can get past the Senate. Okay, meanwhile, the president is pursuing policies at this point. So some of the policies the president is pursuing seem to be, shall we say, short-termism. For example, President Trump is now expected to sign an executive order reclassifying marijuana. I think this is a horrible move. I think that marijuana is, in fact, a massive detriment to young people all across America. I've held this view pretty consistently for a couple of decades because it seemed to me that all of the talk about how marijuana was completely harmless, non-addictive, and all the rest of it was just not borne out by the science. Nor did it seem to me to be borne out by the anecdotal evidence, considering that I know a number of young people who have essentially gotten addicted to pot, especially because the pot strains that are currently available have much higher THC content than the pot strains even when I was a teenager. The president, though, knows that it is a popular idea to reclassify marijuana because the sort of myth-making around the non-harmfulness of marijuana has become so strong. The order would reclassify marijuana from a Schedule I drug, which the DEA defines as having no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse, to a Schedule 3 drug, which the DEA defines as having a moderate to low potential for physical and psychological dependence. I do not see the evidence that marijuana has a moderate to low potential for physical and psychological dependence. That reclassification could have implications for research of marijuana or use for medical purposes. President Trump said that he was considering reclassification very strongly. He said, we're considering that because a lot of people want to see it, the reclassification, because it leads to tremendous amounts of research that can't be done unless you reclassify it. So we're looking at that very strongly. Okay, if we really believe that reclassification of marijuana in order to do research on marijuana is the thing, I am skeptical that that is what this is about. I've yet to see a major medical issue other than perhaps stem cell research that has broken into the public view with regard to should we do more research on it or not. Certainly not with regard to marijuana. A year ago, President Trump had suggested his return to the White House would usher in a new era for marijuana, making it easier for adults to access safe products and giving states greater leeway to pursue legalization. He had started talking about this in 2024, of course, when he was running for re-election. This seems to me a bad move. According to the Kalshi markets, it is now a near certainty that there will be a rescheduling of marijuana before 2028. Unlikely, according to the Kalshi markets, they're a sponsor of the show, that marijuana will be rescheduled this year, but before the end of 2026, 82% shot in the prediction markets. Before 2028, 89% shot in the prediction. That's what we need. We need more young people enervated by pot. I can't see how that would go wrong in any possible way. And the sort of short-term thinking, temporary payoffs to motivated constituencies. Well, I mean, there is a downside, which is that people high on pot don't tend to vote in massive numbers. Well, at the same time, over in Los Angeles, we do have news with regard to the Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer Reiner murders at the hands, allegedly, of their son, Nick. Prosecutors have now charged Nick Reiner with 2 counts of first-degree murder. He also faces a special allegation of using a dangerous and deadly weapon, a knife. Here's the Los Angeles County District Attorney Nathan Hochman talking about it.
Today, I'm here to announce that our office will be filing charges against Nick Reiner, who is accused of killing his parents, actor-director Rob Reiner, and photographer-producer Michelle Singer Reiner. These charges will be 2 counts of first-degree murder with a special circumstance of multiple murders. He also faces a special allegation that he personally used a dangerous and deadly weapon, that being a knife. These charges carry a maximum sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole or the death penalty.
So obviously this person should go to prison for life, but we also have, so many red flags. And this, again, I think that the biggest takeaway for an enormous number of Americans is if you have members of your family who are in serious need of professional help, do not gloss it over out of love for your family members. That sort of empathy leads to terrible consequences in too many cases. Apparently, Reiner's troubled son, Nick, reportedly stormed off in a huff, according to the New York Post, after a tiff with comedy heavyweight Bill Hader at Conan O'Brien's Christmas party, which preceded the murder by not very long. Nick, who was accused of slaughtering his filmmaker's dad and mom in their Brentwood home sometime between Saturday night and Sunday afternoon, interrupted Hader at the holiday bash, according to an eyewitness. When the SNL alum told Nick he was in the middle of a private conversation, the source said Nick just stood there and stared before storming off. The unsettling interaction concerned other partygoers. Apparently, he was not invited, but his parents tried to bring him, and the trio got into a very loud argument, possibly because Nick was back on drugs and refusing yet another go at treatment. So, terrible, terrible story on every front possible. Just a horrifying story. Meanwhile, we still don't know who the shooter is in the Brown University case. There have been a lot of rumors online. I don't bring you rumors. So I'm going to wait until we actually have some confirmation from authorities as to who they believe committed this heinous act of violence. The police did release new videos of the suspected gunman responsible for Saturday's shooting at Brown University as the investigation entered a 4th day, according to the Wall Street Journal. The videos show a light-skinned man wearing dark clothing, a medical mask, beanie, and at times gloves and a crossbody bag. The man is seen pacing, walking, and running through residential streets near Brown in the 2 hours before the attack. Apparently, there's also footage of the potential suspect walking past a police cruiser with its lights on after the shooting. Providence Police Department Chief Oscar Perez said, "We believe he was actually casing out this area to commit the crime." Now, there are cameras everywhere, but apparently no cameras in the area that he was. So that is why they're having a tough time identifying him, supposedly. Again, there are rumors that they've already identified him, but they've not released it yet. Here was the police chief asking the public for help in identifying the shooter.
And the reason we have shown these videos, there's a purpose, right? So as you can see, they're enhanced photos, there's enhanced video footage. And so we're asking the public to ensure that they can see them. They can see here that you want to follow the body movements, the way the person moved their arms, the body posture, the way they carry their weight. I think those are important movement patterns that may help you identify this individual, which is extremely important.
There's some suspicion that the targets of the shooting had to do with Jewishness. The professor who is leading this particular study group was the head of the Judaic Studies program over at Brown University. Whether or not this is linked to another murder that happened apparently in Brookline near Boston is unclear. According to the Jerusalem Post, Nuno Loureiro, a nuclear scientist at MIT, was shot dead inside his home in the town of Brookline near Boston. He was found critically wounded by gunfire inside his residence and was rushed to a nearby hospital where he was pronounced dead in the early morning hours. The circumstances surrounding the shooting are still being examined. There's no possible suspect yet. There's no possible motive yet. A neighbor said that he heard 3 loud bangs. It appears to be a targeted killing. Various Jewish organizations have speculated online that the professor was targeted for his political affiliations as a pro-Israel advocate. Again, unclear whether that is the case or not. Over in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, a 35-year-old Jewish man was stabbed on Kingston Avenue, with the attacker reportedly shouting, "F these Jews," and saying it would be all right if the Holocaust happened today. So it's been an interesting Hanukkah for the Jewish community globally. We'll bring you the latest on all of this. One of the fascinating aspects of so many of these incidents is that even when you know the motive full scale, there's still an attempt by legacy media to cover it up. This is particularly true when the motive happens to be radical Islam. Reporter Linda Kincaid, reporting on the Bondi Beach shooting over in Sydney, Australia, she points out there were ISIS flags in the car of the shooters.
Authorities are now investigating a possible link with extremists. They found dashcam footage that showed an ISIS flag taped to the window of the suspect's car. Inside that car, there were also unexploded devices and another 2 homemade ISIS flags.
Okay, well, at the same exact time that this is being reported, and we all know that this is a radical Islamic terror attack, ABC News' Faith Abube downplayed the extremist motive entirely.
As for the suspect, authorities say one of them was a licensed gun owner with 6 firearms, but they have not yet revealed a motive. Guys,
we'll find that out.
I mean, I'm sorry. Like, this is just bad reporting. It's just bad reporting. Democrats are focused for all of their time and effort on taking your gun. So radical Muslims shoot up Jews in Sydney. Time to take your guns. Here's Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, who has presided over mass Muslim migration into Minnesota, which has resulted, among other things, in over $1 billion in fraud. Here he is saying that it is BS that assault weapons being banned would somehow encroach upon our constitutional freedoms.
I don't know. Do you really think limiting them to less than 100 bullets is going to do anything? Yes. Yes, it is. Yes, it is going to save lives. Just like the extreme risk protection orders, which I can pull quotes from many of these folks who said, this will do nothing. This will not protect lives. This will take away our freedoms. It's time to start reporting that is all bullshit. It does do something. It does make a difference. And to stand here and have to look in the eyes of parents who lost their little ones, shame on them. And shame on us if we don't get this done.
Again, amazing that after there is a shooting at Brown University, motive unknown, and a shooting in Bondi Beach, motive very much known, the solution is for you to give up your AR-15, apparently. President Trump has a better solution. That would be to expand his travel ban to a wide variety of radicalized Muslim countries. The Trump administration has now instituted, according to Axios, full restrictions and entry limitations against Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, South Sudan, and Syria, as well as people with travel documents issued by the Palestinian Authority. The White House said in an announcement, many of the restricted countries suffer from widespread corruption, fraudulent or unreliable civil documents and criminal records, and non-existent birth registration systems systematically preventing accurate vetting. Makes some sense, especially given the problems that we have had with vetting the immigrants coming to the United States. Joining me on the line is Cabot Phillips. He's a Morning Wire contributor, and he has a brand new report on something called Manhattan Project 2.0. Cabot, thanks so much for the time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, Ben.
So why don't you tell me about Manhattan Project 2.0? What is this?
Yeah. So over the last few years, as AI has burst on the scene nationwide, most of the development has actually been happening in the private sector in Silicon Valley. Companies we all know, OpenAI, Microsoft, Google. But the Trump administration is really big that this whole thing is a national security issue, similar to the nuclear arms race or the space race in the 50s and 60s. And they're adamant that, hey, if we fall behind here to China, to Russia, any other country, it's going to have the same impact as if we had not been the first to create nuclear weapons in the 1940s. So they're calling this the New Manhattan Project, basically to create this sense of urgency that, hey, we cannot let other countries get ahead of us here. So Trump wants the federal government to play a big role in helping these private sector companies get ahead, if nothing else, for national security. So he signed a number of executive orders. He's pushed billions, if not trillions of dollars into these industries over the next decade. And this most recent executive order that he signed last month, they're calling it the Genesis Mission. It's going to connect 40,000 scientists at 17 nationwide labs. These are national labs. And it's also directing those national labs to create one single coordinated AI platform. I talked to a number of AI scientists for this mini documentary, and a lot of them said a big issue that they've been having is they're all working on separate platforms. So they might have similar data, but they're not actually collaborating here because they're all on separate platforms. So the Trump administration is trying to create one centralized place for all this research to take place. Now, one of the biggest needs for the new AI software that's being developed is data. These projects require huge amounts of data to train their software on real world applications. And the executive order is saying, hey, the government, if nothing else, has plenty of data. So they're going to provide these private companies access for the first time to huge government databases on everything from, energy grids, weather patterns, geological surveys, healthcare, you name it. And then from there, the AI companies are being directed to use that data to focus their AI machines on what the government is calling challenges of national importance. That includes advanced manufacturing, robotics, biotechnology, and then nuclear fission. So basically, the Trump administration is telling the private sector, we have the data, we have the infrastructure and the money. You guys have the technology and the engineers. Let's work together here.
Has there been any blowback as far as the government involvement in the AI sector? Obviously, it's politically pretty volatile because there are a lot of major AI companies right now that are all competing with one another. And as soon as the government gets involved in the private sector, even though this is the private sector kind of helping out a government mission, you're going to run into some obstacles. Well, what's the blowback been like?
It's interesting. The blowback has been more from the smaller and newer AI companies. So a lot of the bigger companies, for example, I for the documentary, I interviewed Greg Brockman. He's the co-founder of OpenAI, probably the most influential one in the space. He was all for this. He said, hey, this is great. There's been this Wild West scenario for AI for years where no one has really known what government regulation was going to look like. And so this regulation will actually be a good thing because we now know the set of rules we're playing with. There's more government support. But there are smaller emerging AI companies that say, yeah, of course, the big guys are fine with this because they have huge legal teams that can navigate these new regulations. They have a lot more money. They have a lot more lobbying influence, and they have a lot more access to the White House. And so, of course, the big boys want this because it might stifle competition. That has been the big rub. And then the other part of this has been Trump trying to streamline AI regulations at the state level. So we know that there are a number of states, especially red states, that are concerned about these AI data centers popping up in their states for potential health reasons. And they're also concerned about, what the implications are of having all this software at the state level for privacy, things of that nature. The Trump administration, they do not want this patchwork type of regulations for AI. So they've issued a new executive order basically giving Attorney General Bondi the right to overrule state-level regulations on AI. And they're now threatening these states, saying, if you guys pass AI regulations that they said would enact onerous AI laws, whatever that means, then we can restrict federal funding and federal broadband grants to your states. So Trump is trying to keep each state from having their own regulations. He's saying if you have 50 different regulations in 50 different states, the US will not have AI innovation. And so I think that is the other element of this where you're going to see a lot of back and forth tug of war, especially on the right, because a lot of MAGA folks are not happy about that executive order from the president.
Well, it's a fascinating controversy and a fascinating move by the Trump administration, recognizing a very real threat in the possible Chinese domination of AI. That's Cabot Phillips, Morning Wire contributor. You can go check out Morning Wire every day here at Daily Wire Plus. Cabot, appreciate the time.
Absolutely.
Alrighty, coming up for our subscribers, the New York Times has a long expose on just where Jeffrey Epstein got his money. It's pretty fascinating. Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.